You're tuned into The Collective Voice, thought-provoking interviews co-hosted by young adults, fostering deep faith through courageous questions. Welcome to the conversation. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to this episode of The Collective Voice. I'm Reverend Phil Dieke. Collective Voice is the podcast of the 787 Collective at Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary. And I am just grateful to have the opportunity today to be in conversation with Baird Linke. We are missing Rudy, our colleague who is usually with us today. Rudy is out on vacation this week, so good for Rudy. Glad Rudy's doing vacation things. But I didn't want to pass up on the opportunity to bring Baird in on the conversation because we are going to be in conversation with a couple of your colleagues as well, Baird. And as I often do, like the way we got in contact with Baird was we found that y'all at Augsburg in Minneapolis, right? Isn't it Minneapolis?
Yep.
Twin Cities in general?
Yep.
Yeah, in that area.
Right
Augsburg are colleagues of ours through the young adult. Oh, perfect. See, there you go. Augsburg is one of the young adult initiative grant recipients in the same way that we are from the Lilly Endowment. And so we get together at least once a year in Indianapolis, which everybody wants to go to Indianapolis all the time. That's fun. But then we also collaborate and just get to share ideas and things. And so Augsburg is putting out a book, which we are excited to learn more about. And it's called Hungry for Hope: Letters to the Church from Young Adults. And so we assumed we were probably never going to create a book through this grant. And so anytime our colleagues are creating books of this, we're like, well, we need to try to just dive in on this because y'all are doing cool work creating books. And the really cool thing about this one is every chapter is a different letter from a young adult that is directed to the church. And so I'm going to give you a chance, Baird, to just introduce yourself here. And I want to dive in on this book and how this became an idea that turned into an actual book. So we'd love to hear a little bit more about you.
Awesome. Thanks, Phil. Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Baird Linke. I'm a pastor in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. I'm serving in Montana, right outside of Missoula, in a small town called Bonner. I am fresh into that call. So when I started writing my chapters for this, I was still deep into seminary. And so life experience is a little bit different now than when I was writing.
We could probably do a lot of conversation just around that idea of the transitioning into full-time ministry, huh?
Oh, man. Yeah, boy. Boy, howdy.
Yeah.
I was ordained in September late September, and I think I preached 4 times before the election in 2024. So a real exciting time to get to know a community. Yeah, we can talk about all those dynamics. Bonner's a really unique space to be doing that sort of thing in.
Okay.
I am also very involved with ELCA Young Adults as the kind of national ministry, the various expressions that comes out with, from digital ministry to global mission. I am a board member for Lutherans Restoring Creation, very involved with campus ministry in Missoula here at the University of Montana, as well as with Flathead Lutheran Bible Camp, which is just north of us outside of Glacier National Park. This book really came together out of the Augsburg Riverside Innovation Hub, for which I was an innovation coach, which is definitely the most Silicon Valley sounding job title I will ever have in my career. But this is a hub housed in Augsburg, which is an ELCA, Evangelical Lutheran Church in America university, that was looking at how does this university, the center of learning, where there are really skilled, interesting people coming together to try and teach and prepare folks for whatever their vocation will be out in the world. How can we make that into a hub of resources for the broader community of people who are doing ministry around Minneapolis, around St. Paul? And they really emphasize the experience and skill set of young adults as people who, one, the church tends to have a lot of curiosity about, which we will talk about with my chapter in particular, but also as people who have a really distinct view on religion, on the goings on of the world, how culture is shifting, what it is like to be caught up in that, and what kind of communities are supportive, encouraging, kind of creative, and interesting for people in that stage of life in particular to be a part of. So I worked with them for a year. I worked with 2 different congregations. One was a really big suburban church, and one was a tiny little Methodist church plant in South Minneapolis. So I got a real range of experience for what ministry was looking like in Minneapolis at that time. And from there, kind of springboarded into my seminary journey on towards becoming an ordained pastor. And now I'm here. I've done it. I've Well, I've done the school stuff. Now time to do the work.
Yeah. I mean, you have an appointment. You have done it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So
Right.
the Innovation Hub has had a few different iterations of things that they were trying out. They're a really experimental group there, as I'm sure you guys have experienced at Austin
Sure.
Seminary. And this book is the result of a lot of the listening that went into working directly with young adults, with empowering them to be leaders in faith spaces, and hearing a lot of similar frustrations or concerns or things that we're having a hard time communicating to congregations that we want more folks to understand. So the idea behind this was that we would pair young adult authors who are highly concerned with a specific area as and they would be paired with a kind of subject matter expert in that area, whether that's a professor or researcher, and be able to bring those two perspectives together to present to the larger church what young adults are feeling, where God is calling them into the world, the particular wounds that they're being called to heal, and
Mm-hmm.
hope to share that with the church more broadly, ideally as a invitation into deeper conversation, as well as hopefully some orienteering for churches and congregations that are curious about where God is moving, to say these are folks who are, elbow deep in this work, who are trying to help
Right.
draw your attention to it. So it started with this event that called the Threshold event, where we brought together a ton of young adults from around the country, both deeply involved in the church and those that are working in other vocations, as well as people from a lot of different faith backgrounds. So we had mainline Protestants, we had a good number of Catholics represented there, as well as a few evangelical Pentecostal types, non-denominational space. And the goal of that gathering was to kind of draw out what is weighing on these young people's hearts and to draw from that the themes that would be addressed in the book. It was a really powerful weekend getting together
Mm-hmm.
with folks. I was doing my internship, my pastoral internship at the time, so I was coming in from Cleveland and getting to hear about the work that people were doing, again, in and out of the church, and the ways that they have encountered and experienced God in those spaces is always encouraging, because it makes you feel less alone to know that other people are
Sure.
engaged in the work. And it was also a way of feeling less alone, because a lot of the similar frustrations that young adults were reporting back were shared across the room. And it was
Mm-hmm.
nice to come from a place where I am often the person invited to a congregation to try to be the young adult whisperer of, what's wrong with your generation? Where is everybody? And that's a really lonely place to be. And then I was in a room full of other people who are also always asked to do that. And so we were able to
Right.
commiserate a little bit, and it helped to really flesh out some language around what feels wrong about that role, and the disconnect
Mm-hmm.
that comes from being expected to speak for your entire demographic, or to come and just kind of
Right.
be a talisman to ward off anxiety that the young people are anywhere but church these days. So it was a really cool event to get to be a part of. And then they open it up after pulling these themes, themes like mental health, about gender and sexuality, themes about my chapter, which is tokenization, the experience of being wanted for our youth, but not necessarily for our leadership or our insight. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and pulling those things together to get this book. And we were invited to apply to be writers for different chapters, and so I submitted that. I like to write a lot, and this was a cool opportunity to do so. And they invited me to be a part of writing this chapter on tokenization with my co-author, Reverend Kristen Glass Perez, who was the first director of young adult ministry for the ELCA when she was a young adult herself, and really built that program into the level of embeddedness that it has in the ELCA, and directors that followed her have really built on the foundation that she's laid. She is currently a chaplain working in higher education. When I was writing with her, she was working at Northwestern University outside of Chicago, and now she's in the DC area doing similar work for other schools. And it was great. a really cool
That's
opportunity to get to learn from and write with her and share, realize that these experiences that we're having right now in the mid 2020s are not so different from what young adults were experiencing back in the early 2000s when she was getting into this work. So the good news is these are existing problems that we can understand. The dynamics of the problems haven't changed too much over the last couple decades. The bad news is that the problems have not gone away over the last several decades, that the church has not learned how to adapt to the challenges that we're facing. But that's where we step in,
wow.
as trying to give some context for that and give some ideas of what are the postures that will help. We really try not to be too programmatic about here's the, like, your church needs to put together this kind of pub theology, and that's going to bring all the young
Yeah.
people back. We try to focus more in on what is the posture that you can have, what are the things going on underneath the surface that are bringing about these anxieties, and how can the church work through those things so that they can be better neighbors to and ministers with young people.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point there. I was looking at the website for the book, and it says the purpose of this project was clear. This is not a book about young adults. This is not a guide to attract young adults back to church, which I think is a really interesting distinction, right? I think so many
Yeah.
people. I know when I started doing young adult ministry in the local church, I was looking for all the books, right? I was like, I need all the books to help me understand, like, what are the programmatic things that are going to help me, like, be successful
Mm-hmm.
in young adult, like, and so it is just a very different approach. Like, if you had to summarize who I mean, it says for the church, right? Letters to the church.
Mm-hmm.
Is this really a book to the church then? Like, and if it's the church, like, that's a broad statement, right? Who in the
Yeah, it
church is the
is.
audience?
Well, that's a good question. And you're right. It does maybe narrow the marketing down, where we're deliberately
Yeah.
turning people away who are like you were looking for those books that are like, how do I fix this problem?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sympathetic to that position. I write about this in my chapter. There's good reasons to be worried about young adults and trying to help them become part of the community. We care about people. We want the church to be relevant to people's experience. If we feel like we have
Sure.
gifts that are worth giving, uh, it should be worrying to us that we're not connecting with a particular demographic for whatever reason. We should be curious about
Yeah.
why that is. Um, and I'm this should be the primary thing, but I understand the institutional concern as well of, if we don't have young people in the pews, it's going to be hard for the church to continue existing as it is. I'm a pastor. My church is vastly, at least over 50. Let's put it
Sure.
that way. And so it's a concern in my mind as well of there are challenges that come from young adults not being a part of these places. That said, there is an impulse then to try and solve the problem of numbers without understanding the cause of the disconnect. Um, Maybe a good analogy here would be like, it's the difference between books on relationships and books on dating. Of like,
Ooh.
how do I attract someone at the bar? This is not the game. It's not trying to give people the skills to stand out in a public space to attract a date. It's more trying to understand, how do you show up in relationships? What are you looking for in a partner? That analogy gets clunky at a certain point, but
Sure.
the hope is that this book is written for the church broadly. It's written for clergy and ministers who are curious about what the life of faith is like for young people, how to speak to the particular things that they're going through, transitions, trying to really build around identity and who am I and vocation and things like that, and be a place where that the church can help speak productively to those concerns. I think a large demographic, and this is maybe wishful thinking, but I'm hoping that parents will read this book and try to
Oh, wow.
understand. In those experiences where I'm invited to churches to talk to people about young adulthood, about young adults, about faith, the conversation often comes back to either, so what's different about you? that I'm still involved with the church, like very heavily involved with the church. That
Sure.
faith is a really important part of my life. Um, but that's not really a question about me. That's more of a question about their kids. Why is my
Hmm.
kid not involved anymore? And it's
Yeah.
either what's wrong with them or what did I do wrong as a parent? And I don't know how to answer those questions in particular in those settings, especially. I can't answer that in any way that's going to be satisfying. I see the pain that comes from that. Parents
Sure.
are deeply hurt that their kids aren't involved in this thing that has been an important part of their life, that can feel like a rejection of them as a parent if they're rejecting the church as an institution, which their parents have found so much meaning in. And I'm
Hmm.
hoping that parents who might be feeling that way can read this book and understand a little bit better why their kids aren't connecting as much with the institutions that they find so much meaning in.
Hmm.
The thing that I want people most of
Hmm.
all to take away from this is to understand that young adults are not disinterested in questions of God or meaning making or morality or justice or finding good community. They are really curious about this. Many of my friends are atheists or agnostic or spiritual seekers. A lot of them are spiritual but not religious types. Um, and they take Jesus really, really seriously. When they read the Gospels, when they hear about Jesus and the vision that he has for the world, really, we're preaching on Luke right now, so it's in the back of my mind. But I
Yeah.
came to bring good news to the poor, to set the captive free, to bring freedom to the oppressed. Those are when people read that and take it seriously and see all the ways in the world that that is badly needed, and then go to the
Hmm.
church that says, and it's best if we can just be cheerful to each other. It's really good if we just find comfort in the knowledge that God is there and that God loves us without any of the other aspects of the human experience, without the aspects of Jesus' experience of anger at injustice, of commitment to people who are suffering, of making the hard choice to get out of what is comfortable and respectable and financially stable or predictable for donors and go to the places where the need is most deeply felt. If people come to the church looking for Jesus and they don't find Jesus there, why would they waste their time? And
Hmm.
I was really fortunate. I grew up in congregations that I think are really healthy. I got to experience campus ministry and camping outdoor ministries that I think really try to walk the walk. Um, and so I've seen how it can go really well, which is part of why I keep showing up. People ask me,
Yeah, I mean that
what?
was my question, right? If you were going to
Yeah.
talk about like not to tokenize you, right,
Mhm,
but like
mhm.
to just to recognize your story. I think that's an important piece of it. Is you are not necessarily a representation of your demographic by at large. So what was it that really kept you involved? And I heard you say like healthy churches and campus ministry, but what was the tug or what were the things that really kept you involved that led you then to decide you wanted to go down the ordination path?
Yeah, there are a few things involved with that. One is, especially when I was little, I was a weird kid. I think I'm probably a weird adult. Uh, but
Yeah.
the church was one of the places that helped me handle my social anxieties. Um, I had a good memory for stories, and I also didn't know when to shut up. And so when I was little and I was talking all the time and had a good head for Bible verses, people were like, "No fear of public speaking, and he knows about the Bible. Well, that's a pastor." And I resisted that for a long time because I think deep down I was like, "No, that's all that it is to be a pastor," and I'm not sure that that's the only reason that someone would become that, but
Yeah.
because I've seen it go right, because I've
Mm.
seen what can happen when communities are built around a deep commitment to love and are so committed to love that they can hold the rest of it loosely, that can say,
Mm.
we have loved this practice or this event or whatever, and it's served us well, but it's not serving us well anymore. So we can let it go because we know that the
Mm.
higher goal is that anyone who comes to be a part of this community, the first thing that they experience is love.
Mm.
And seeing how that works, how that changes people, how that changed me, like there's something here in the community that's worth
Mm-hmm.
investing in. I am completely smitten by the by the incarnation, by Jesus, by God with us. Like, there's so many pieces of Christian theology that I find really beautiful, and I don't think that I'm alone on that. I think that there are a lot of young adults who can, like I said earlier, love Jesus but have real skepticism about the church. I was really
Right.
fortunate that I grew up knowing how to love Jesus and saw what happens when the church goes well. And so my skepticism for the church is lower, I guess, than for other people. And I've had an easier time of it. I'm a straight white dude, blonde-haired, blue-eyed German dude from a like happily married middle class family. Uh I fit the type of the kind of person who's gonna have a good time in the Lutheran Church. Um, it's been relatively easy for me, so I acknowledge that, and I think that the church needs to really reflect and repent on the ways that it's not easy for people who don't fit that mold. But there are other aspects of the ministry that we do together that I think can't happen if we're all just in our own pockets, doing ministry just around a table, which is good ministry to do. I think eventually we're probably going to go back towards like mostly being house churches, which is okay. And there's real beauty in that. But I look at programs like ELCA World Hunger or Lutheran Disaster Response, or I'm a Lutheran, so I'm a specialist in this world. But other churches do this as well. These really large scale ways of caring for people that can't happen unless you are in a big community. That takes a lot of people, takes a lot of resources, takes a lot of infrastructure. And I think those things are valuable. The Lutheran World Federation is one of the largest partners with the UNHCR. We administer some of the largest refugee camps in the world because of our faith. And I'm proud of that. I think that that's a really incredible thing that we get to do together by following Jesus into the world. And I think that those, to me, are worth protecting and trying to invest in, even as we need to evolve the way that we're building community on the local level, on the grassroots.
So good.
And it's not to say that the church-wide organization is perfect, or like the picture of efficiency or grace or anything like that. All levels of this are human, but I've been able to see the good work that happens on the national, the global, the hyper local level that the church can do, and I'm just blown away by community and what we can do together. And I think that I sometimes am skeptical of my peers having a very individualist look at, well, if this community isn't fitting exactly what I want it to be, if I am not in full agreement with everyone here, then it's not a place where it can find God. And there's nuances to that. Like, is it a place that's unsafe? Great, then don't don't be a part of that. But
Yeah, totally.
even progressive, enlightened folks can still have this American individualism down to a really deep core that looks at community with a lot of skepticism, and thinks that individuality is going to be the thing that saves us, or consumerism of like being a consumer of communities or churches. I think that we all have areas where we can reflect on the ways that the market is kind of imposing its values on us in ways that we don't, if we were really reflective about it, wouldn't be happy about.
Right.
And I
Right.
think that the church is when it goes well, should be a viable alternative. It should show us what a different way of being together can look like. And we're human, we're
Yeah.
sinful, we come into those spaces and we bring it all with us. So it's never going to be
Absolutely.
perfect, but it's good practice. And
Yeah.
I think it's valuable to get rooted there. And this is not trying to minimize the need to like be protective of yourself in a world that often is not safe, for people, especially with marginalized identities. But everything before the butt is bullshit. So I guess I should rephrase this. And
Everything before the yeah, totally. I like it.
yeah. Sorry, are we allowed to swear? My bad.
I mean, we'll just have to put the explicit tag on it, which is actually, I think you get one. You get one cuss word before you have to put the explicit tag on. So we're good
Wow.
right now. But if you put another one in, then but it's all fine. No worries.
Golly. G Gompers.
Golly
Okay.
gee willikers.
All right, I'll make it very tame going forward. There's a dynamic to that where we become very disposable of other people. And I don't mean having patience for racists who are like aggressing against you. I mean, communities are slow and boring and frustrating, and they make it really hard to get stuff done. And uh, it's hard to be a part of them, especially around deeply held values, around the urgency of the problems that we're facing in the world right now. Um, and it can be very easy then to say, well, then community is not the context where I can meet God, where I can be a part of following God's vision for the world, where I can participate in building justice. And I would agree with those frustrations. And I would caveat it with the question of how is that different from this hyper capitalistic, hyper individualistic society that says either I have to do it all and there's no one else out there who's covering my back or is paying attention to these things, or these idiots are in my way and I need to and because I'm the only one who can do it all. And I would challenge us about that spiritual impulse to dismiss community as the context for building justice, because it's inefficient. But what is justice without community? What is connection without community? And that might mean that we need to build alternative communities. It could be that the communities that we have are not working, and I'm very open to that.
I love so much what the ELCA has done so we've been fortunate to work with the Gather Network, so we had Elizabeth Gilbert on recently.
Great.
From Cincinnati, and we work really closely with CC here at Gather Austin. And one of the things I love about the Gather Network is that it's just very open and honest about the fact that they say, like, we want to collaborate with people who are going to be queer inclusive, anti-ableist, and anti-racist, and I think the beauty in that clarity is, when we'll just say the Southern Baptist Church, for instance, because it's been in the news again about like,
Right.
We don't want women pastors. Well, like, that makes it very clear of who's welcome here and who's not welcome here, right? If like, I don't want to go to a church where there's a woman pastor, like, I know it's a place I can go to. If I don't want to go to a church where like, because they're not going to allow women pastors, well, I know, like, I'm probably not going to go to the Southern Baptist Church then, right? So there's just something about the transparency piece of it. And I think that what I'm seeing in young adults, and again, I'm really trying to be careful to not tokenize, right? But like, what I'm seeing in young adults is they really value that transparency.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, they want to know when they show up, what are they going to get?
That's one of the things that Augsburg found in their research of congregations, was one of the clearest indicators that, or predictors, that a church would have good and healthy participation from young adults is, whether it's conservative or progressive, clarity about their moral worldview, about their take on social issues. And I think that is instructive, that we don't have time for kind of mealy-mouthed ideas of, well, do you affirm women in ministry? Well, that's a complicated question. It's like, no, I don't think it is. And I don't necessarily want to be a part of a community that thinks that that's a complicated question. And there can be dynamics of, well, I personally have questions about this, and me in conversation with someone else, we can have a conversation. That's very different from, no, buy into being a part of this community that will not affirm your leadership, you young woman, you queer person, you person of color, and give us the time to eventually maybe institutionally turn the ship around. Suspend your suspicion of us while we are under no obligation to suspend our suspicion of you. That's very, on the community side, like, that's consuming people. And the consumerism is it cuts both ways there. Sure. When I talk about tokenism of young people in communities, it kind of aligns along some of what we've just been describing of churches are anxious, institutions are anxious. And the job of an institution is to perpetuate the institution. That's more important than their mission. That's more important than the work that they are called to do. Um, and that is just a reality of living in institutions and communities. And that sucks that bureaucracy just like always needs to have its say. But I understand it. That's a legitimate concern to have.
You should
Like,
say institutions are going to institute. That's just
yeah,
what they do.
and that's okay. Again, like I like what large institutions are capable of doing when they have their values in alignment. I don't like it when institutions are not aware that those are competing values.
Yeah.
If the candidacy process for becoming a pastor in the ELCA is a good example of this. There are plenty of times along that process where in the discernment, the church will say, here's where you're going for internship, or here's the synod, which is like our version of a diocese
Right.
Or a conference.
Mm-hmm.
Here's where you're going to start in looking for a congregation. And there's a certain amount of independence that candidates have, but there's a lot of institutional pressure to look at congregations that are really struggling, congregations that have
Mm-hmm.
not been with leadership for a long time. I'm in Montana. We have a lot of very small congregations out in pretty remote communities that badly
Yeah.
want and need pastoring or ministry. And the conversation can very easily become, we really think that the Spirit is leading you to serve one of these communities, whether or not that actually aligns with the skill set, the values, the needs of the candidate. And I'm fine with the institution saying, hey, we have these churches that badly need people. Let's take a look at that, because we, like, the people there deserve to have ministry in their area. They deserve to have pastoral care and people who are walking with them through these life transitions. And also, as an institution, we have a responsibility to try and keep the lights on there. I'm okay with that. That's a frank conversation that we can have about
Totally.
whether or not I'm willing to put it on the line to go to a place that might not be my ideal call. Um, and could be, depending on the people. There are plenty of folks who would love to
For
do
sure.
rural ministry if they have the institutional backing to bring
Right.
their theology there. But instead, we frame it as, well, look, I think the Spirit is really moving us into this direction. And that feels gross to me. That feels like we're using the Spirit to justify institutional priorities. And those aren't always opposed to each other, but they are not the same thing. And I would prefer us to say, there are institutional concerns here. Let's be frank about that. Then we can
Right.
have a legitimate conversation about the competition then. There are institutional concerns about keeping people in the church, about maintaining our donor base so that we can continue doing the ministry that we're doing. We
Yep.
don't want to alienate that donor base. However, there are things in the world that require commentary that are going to be controversial, that are going to upset people because it's challenging their worldview. And what use is a church that can't challenge people's worldview? That's that's the entire point of us existing, is to try and show a different way of life that's rooted in a God that is drawing us out of everything that we assume has to be the way that it is. So those competing concerns there are a lot easier to manage when we're just frank about them. When we're not frank about them, they come out sideways, and tokenization is
Yeah.
one of the ways that comes out. Tokenization is an institutional coping mechanism for anxiety, where the institution can say, we're worried about losing our relevance. We're worried that we're not connecting with whatever demographic. And there's all sorts of different identities that can be tokenized. Young adulthood is a weird one because it's such a transitory identity to hold. But churches use it as a metric for health or prosperity or stability. And so young people are brought in, and I talk to a lot of a lot of my peers who have the experience of going to a church for the first time and having people react like they are a drowning person that's just been thrown a life preserver, where people are like, thank God you're here. wow, we're gonna be okay because a young person came to service. And that's a lot of pressure to put on a newcomer to the church of any kind, much less one who might be trying out church for the first time in years
Right.
after drifting away after confirmation, of feeling like, I don't know, maybe there's something about this community that is missing. I'm curious about God in ways that I wasn't for the first few years after college or whatever, because it wasn't a priority for me. To walk into a church and have that be the reaction of like, if you've ever taken lifeguard training, they tell you that you should be really careful when you're going out to someone who is drowning, because in their panic, they may drown their rescuer and not
That's
realize that
right.
that's what
Yeah.
they're doing.
The flailing. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, like they will grab you and shove you underwater to keep their head up.
That's
And
right.
that is that's a scary thing for people to walk into. And so my co-author, who Kristen, who has this very long experience of looking at dynamics over the last couple of decades at this, has
Mm-hmm.
noticed a trend that she calls it the hyperarchy, where young people are in a community, they show some skill, some investment, some commitment to that community, and the institutional response is like, all right, we got to hook them and we got to hold on tight. And so resources are poured into this person where they are constantly invited to do cool stuff, where they are elevated. They're given a lot of praise for their commitment to Jesus, for their ability as a leader or whatever. Um, and that gets into the point where this young person does feel really committed to the community because it's true, like they've been poured into, and that's good. They've been formed. But it also can get to the point where that has closed off other opportunities. They've prioritized opportunities for church leadership over other things that are going on in their life, which is fine from a vocational standpoint if that's truly where your vocation is leading you. And then the young people start to be transformed by these experiences. They get to encounter God in really significant, meaningful ways. And in that transformation, they look around at the world and start to see ways that it could be different about the culture that they grew up in that doesn't have to be the default. And they start to ask questions about, why are we doing things this way when we know that it's not serving the ultimate purpose of proclaiming the gospel or serving the needy or bringing justice to the oppressed? And the institutional response is, well, you're very young, so it's complicated. And the natural reaction of a young adult who's in the system is, well, hold on. All my life, you've been telling me how much you trust me, how valuable my faith is, how sterling it is that we have young people who are committed to the Lord in these ways. And now when I talk about where God is calling me, when I talk about how I think God has something to say about climate change or about the genocide in Gaza, the church goes, I mean, like, probably for sure, but Mr. O'Shaughnessy, he's a big donor. He's retired and he's been very generous in his retirement. And he got his wealth by being a geologist for Shell. And we don't want to offend him and alienate him from the church. And so we're not going to talk about climate change, like, period. and
Woo.
and for the young person, I'm very passionate about climate change.
Yeah, I love it. It's good.
Mr. O'Shaughnessy is a made-up character. Any resemblances to persons living or dead are
Right.
totally incidental. But
I appreciate that. That's a good caveat. Yeah.
yeah. My experience is, well, it seems like we could talk to Mr. O'Shaughnessy about how we can acknowledge the reality of climate change and the need to move away from fossil fuels without condemning him for the line of work that he was in, where he, like, back in the 60s, didn't know better. And we can have that conversation. It doesn't have to be condemnatory to the people in our congregation, but because we are not skilled at handling conflict, because we are not skilled at really building community across difference, or even really repentance and helping people walk through that experience of what is it like to realize that the way that you're moving through the world has been harmful in ways that you didn't intend. Uh, Not even like didn't know better, but truly didn't intend. We're not good at that. And so the concern is that we'll collapse under that pressure. And ultimately, on the institutional level, that's coming down to the choice between this young person and their commitment to God and the ways that God is calling them into the world in this very formative stage of life that is directing their vocational life, and the donor who, like, Mr. O'Shaughnessy's spiritual life is important and deserves like care and attention.
Right.
But we're not talking about that. We're talking about which of these people is bringing resources into the church. And that's where the tokenization kicks in, or it becomes really apparent of this young person is here to ward off anxieties about a declining church. It's kind of a talisman that we wave around. Like, no, we're vital, we're young. And as soon as we talk about our experience of God, and we talk about how Jesus is leading us into the world, into very specific places, because we don't donate as much as older folks, which is fine. Like, we shouldn't be expected to. We're early in our careers.
Right.
Our voice, our theological reflection, our commitment to God is treated on a functional level as more sacrificial, more optional than the donations, the voice, the spiritual commitments of older folks. Let's just be frank about the arithmetic that's going into that. And I get it. I understand the institutional constraints, and I understand the emotion that goes behind those things. And also, you can't expect to transform people if you're not willing to be transformed by them. And it is deeply selfish of anyone to expect that someone else's faith, their walk with God, should just edify my experience and my sense that I'm a good person.
Right.
And that is not generational. That's everyone is capable of having that impulse of objectifying someone else's faith experience to be like, we did a good job. We raised a pastor in this congregation. Look at how good we're doing as followers of Jesus. We'll never listen to them when they preach. We'll give them a pat on the shoulder and be like, I remember when you were young, instead of taking seriously the things that they're talking about or trying to teach, or the work that they're doing that they want to tell us about. The person who grows up and becomes a social worker and then comes back to the congregation is like, hey, y'all, we've got some messed up systems, and this bill that's in the legislature could really impact people's lives. And people look at that and go, well, that's separate from faith. Even though the faith that that person was raised with led them to be a social worker, to do the work in the community, and is motivating them to come back to the church to say, we can be a part of each other's faith journeys here. You raised me this way. And there's some real frustration with young people who are raised to love Jesus, who grow up and start talking about what that love is calling them to do. And the church goes, well, that's a bit strong. And you're like, well, you raised me this way.
Right.
What did you expect?
I love the idea of almost putting a comparison between the different gifts that people bring, right? Like the gift of money versus the gift of time and energy versus the gift of a calling or a sense, or even like this, a challenge is a gift in some ways, right? Like a challenging of the systems like you're talking about. And I mean, you're kind of opening the can of worms here, right? On some things of, as institutions have to really take a look at, we want to welcome all these gifts and say there's a space for all of those. But your point on what happens when those gifts start to collide, or like we have to, we're making a choice to prioritize one gift over another because ... right? Because we have all these buildings, and if we don't prioritize the financial piece of it, what are we going to do with all these buildings? We can't sustain them. And like, that's a choice. We are making some choices here, right? And so I'm gonna just take a deep breath on that one, right?
Yeah, and I just want us to be really straight up about what those choices are. There are really good reasons to stay invested in our buildings, to have a physical footprint in our communities, to have a sacred space that's set aside where people can encounter God in a different way. That matters. We should fight for those things. There's value in someone being like, I've been in this building for 50 years. Like this pew is a place where I remember feeling the spirit for the first time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
There's tons of value in that. I'm not trying to dismiss or diminish any of those things, but I want us to be really clear about what we are doing when we're making those choices, about how we're making those choices and what the priorities that reflects look like. Young people have gifts that the church doesn't, in that in as stressful as a stage of life as being a young person, all of the changes, all of the discernment, the figuring out who am I, how do I move through this world. I don't have a whole lot of resources to offer, but I've got a lot of curiosity. Young people are not burdened by and this is a heavy research, but we're not as invested in institutions because we can't be. We just like we don't have houses. We don't have a 401k. Like we have the ability to hold things much looser because we don't have a family that we're responsible for. Like young people without kids have a different vocation than young parents, and both of them are equally vital. The thing that I want people to reflect on is like the disruption that young people are bringing, the approach that they have of Jesus is moving through the world in ways that the church is not keeping up with. And we can change. We can do something about that. We can follow. We can be nimble. That is a gift that, for all sorts of very good reasons, other stages of life and other life situations don't reflect. And that's different from the wisdom of the council president who's been there for 30 years, who's like, let me tell you how we tried this in the past and it didn't work so that we can work on making it go better this time around. Like experience and the gift of flexibility, of holding things loosely, of, I don't want to say lack of commitment, but just the ability to be nimble. Those things, when they come together, are really powerful in collaboration, and we view them as being in competition with each other. And we want young people to be there until they demand collaboration. And Oof. That, I think, that's an institutional value, not a Christian value, not a ministry value, not a neighborly value. But that's the institution coming through. And we're not great at identifying those things. And so the hope of this chapter in particular is to try and be very sympathetic to those institutional priorities while also being adamant that you need to understand how those priorities left unattended or unaddressed or unspoken do violence to the people that you are hoping to have as a part of your community. And there's a little bit of entitlement, I want to say, from older generations that grew up in a society where church attendance was just the expectation. That's what you had to do in order to be a member of good standing in the broader community. And like they rightly can feel some frustration. Like I showed up when I didn't want to. Like it wasn't always free to me, but I still showed up. And they look at this younger generation that says, well, that's no longer a social pressure that is as powerful in our society. I'm not here out of obligation. Yeah. And you can't really make me be here out of obligation. I get why those values collide, why those worldviews find friction, or just experiences find friction with each other. And also, isn't it a little bit healthier for the church, for the spiritual life of the church, that people are there because of Jesus and not because of what the neighbors will say? And I want us to view that as a gift and not as a thing to lament that the times are changing.
Sure.
The times are changing. Yeah. There's nothing that any of us can do to stop that. The question that's then laid before us is, how do we change with those times?
Mm-hmm.
What do we change with those times?
Yep.
And to me, changing the dynamics of institutions, changing the way that we go about ministry is way better than changing our commitment to a gospel that demands peace, that builds courage and justice. Those things, Christ should not be on the table as something that can be done away with or postponed. And think that there are pieces of the institution that could change instead, namely us, the people involved in it. Young people are experiencing transformation all the time. It's scary, it's overwhelming, and it's also really exciting and energizing. And
Yeah.
and I want churches to be excited about that and to be a place that can both hold the undirected pieces of that energy, can like be a stable settling place for a young person who feels overwhelmed by that, and also a place that can hold, reflect, and value the enthusiasm that comes with it as well. Like, the world doesn't have to be this way. Have you guys heard about this? The church would be like, yeah, tell us about it.
Yeah.
And what a gift that would be to young people and to the church more broadly, and then hopefully to the world, that we have communities that are not afraid of transformation, that can hold things loosely and value them for what they are,
Yeah.
and have all of those things be subordinate to the call of Jesus to proclaim love in this world. I don't think that people don't believe in Jesus. I think that people have
Right.
reason not to believe in the church. And we shouldn't be offended by that.
Right. And what a modeling too, right? Of a space of transformation, but also a space where you can model what it looks like to be in healthy conflict and still remain in community together. Again, I feel like in the world we're living in now, that just doesn't exist anymore. You know,
Right.
like, we're so polarized and in these different camps, different spaces where all we want to do is throw stones back and forth at one another, but never come together and actually figure out. And again, I hear what you're like, back to what you're saying earlier of like, there are some spaces for that, and there are other people who aren't ready to be in those spaces, you know,
Mm-hmm.
because they have been so damaged and marginalized and hurt by those spaces. So,
Right. And there's people who aren't ready to be in those spaces and think that they are, because they're not capable of recognizing the harm that they're doing in those spaces. Like,
That's
it's a whole circle.
Yeah.
But what if our discipleship looked more like equipping people to stay grounded and rooted in those tense conversations, and less like memorizing Bible verses and these 10 proverbs for when life feels overwhelming? What does discipleship look like when it is transforming us to be better citizens, to be better neighbors, when it's transforming us to be better proclaimers of the gospel and not reciters of canned verses or sentiments? I think that young people are looking for depth. And it's been this is interesting. When I've through my seminary formation, I've been in a part of a lot of different churches, and I've often been asked to like lead some education stuff, offered adult formation. And the number of times where I have thrown like Lutheranism 101 on the on the list, because I'm like, I need to have a long enough list that people will feel like they have choices. Overwhelmingly, people choose the Lutheranism 101 or the Christianity 101 because they want to go deeper into like, what is this thing that I'm a part of, the denomination that I belong to, the identity that I hold? What don't I remember from confirmation that could be useful for the world today? And young people do it. It's mostly young people signing up for those things, because I think that they recognize that there's real value in these communities, and they don't know enough about it, that they want to grow deeper in their relationship to their history, to their theology, and better be able to explain, like, when their coworkers like, you go to church, which one? What, Lutheran, Methodist? What is that? Like, what's the difference between that and other kinds of Christianity?
They're all the same anyway, right? Like,
basically, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's encouraging to me, and I want to tell those stories as well, that people are curious. People do want to learn and to deepen their relationship with these traditions, with these communities, when they're given the chance to be like, well, hold on, why? Well, tell me more about that. And to have an institution that says, my job here is to kind of educate you to the point where you feel ready to change this place. And that's a scary thing for an institution to commit to say, like, for pastors to effectively say, like, I'm kind of working myself out of a job here. Ideally, a good teacher at the end of the year should be able to say, like, I now have people who are peers, not students. And I think that that's a good discipleship model too, is, pastors are not the Lord. we're not the teacher. That's a skill set and a vocation that we have. But at the end of the day, we should be co-disciples with people. We should be, leaders amongst equals, or have a particular skill set amongst equals. But at the end of the day, people should be feeling ready to interpret God in their own life and not need us as a mediator for it.
Baird, this is a lot. You shared a lot here. It's real good. And if this doesn't lead people to want to go get the book, I don't know what will. But, again, I mentioned we're going to do, I think, at least one, if not two more interviews with other authors from the book. It's coming out at the end of the month, right? Isn't it August 28th, the release date that
August
I saw?
August 28th. My dad's birthday.
Pre-order it now. Easy to remember, right?
Yep.
Easy to remember. I want to just do a kind of closing on this. Again, you talked about a whole lot of things, right? Like, you talked a lot about how sometimes young adults find themselves in a kind of conflict with the institutions and systems and all these things. In the midst of all that you've been transitioning, and moving to a new space, taking your first call in as a pastor, and what are you doing to remain grounded and continuing to feed yourself as somebody who continues to show up day to day as a pastor who's in the midst of all of this as a young adult?
Yeah, it's a good question. And the things that I know I should be doing are different from the things that I am doing for it.
Amen to that. Amen to that.
Yep. I'm really lucky. I was in a position coming out of seminary where I could say no to stuff until the right thing came along. I don't have kids, so I didn't have any dependents. It wasn't like I need insurance and the first church that comes knocking is gonna be the one to go to. So I was able to wait to find this community, and Missoula has a bunch of my friends from working at summer camp, from doing global mission. So I have great social network, and the ministry network here, the peer network amongst clergy, is also really, really strong. There's a ton of retired pastors here. There are a bunch of other Lutheran and Methodist and Presbyterian ministers. We do text study together. That's where I'm going after this conversation.
Oh, that's
so
fun.
I also have a lot of mentorship in the area, and waiting until I was able to find a community where those things lined up has been really good. Otherwise, I've been trying to prioritize getting outside more. I love being in the outdoors and just moving my body. And a couple weeks ago, I just realized, like, I'm waiting for the opportunity to do that, to come and just like kick down the door and like drag me outside. And that's not the way that works. And I need to actually like put dates on the calendar and be like, I am out of cell range on these days. I will not be engaged. I'm going to be on dirt.
It's so hard to do.
It's so hard to do. But that's been my focus right now, of making sure that I am being deliberate about that, and not saying I'll fit it in where I fit it in, and instead saying the other stuff has to fit in around me going and filling my cup in these ways. I just established adult things, just established my primary care provider relationships. We're back on Lexapro, which is great news for me, and my insurance covers some therapy, so I'm diving into that as well. So those are
good work.
Those are some of the things. But
that's great.
Yeah, and also I've been trying to really prioritize listening to music, reading fiction, and reading poetry, just for the beauty of it. This is not reflective of mental health, but I was doom scrolling on Blue Sky the other day and saw someone post it, like, there are so many self-help books out there, and I've read my fair share, that
Sure.
at the end of the day boil down to you need more beauty in your life. And so I realized instead of picking up that next how to pull your life together book, I should go pick up some poetry and do that. So
it's so funny. Often my final question is, where have you seen beauty lately, or where have you experienced beauty lately? So you just answered that one too. You got both of them here. So yeah, John O'Donoghue's book on beauty, if you haven't read it, I would highly recommend. It's such a lovely, so good. So good.
Perfect.
Yeah, I'm sure he needs another book recommendation. If I'm guessing you don't have any of those.
I tried to do an annual read through of Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, and Annie Dillard, man, she's just a knockout writer, and the way that she talks about the complexity and the beauty and the horror of nature sometimes of the natural world, it's really, really good. The first chapter I quote it in sermons all the time, of, see if I can do it off the dome.
Okay.
In the time of Lewis and Clark, lighting a fire or a smoke signal meant to come down to the water. It was an extravagant gesture, but we can do no other. The extravagant gesture is the very nature of creation. It's been on fire since the word go. I butchered that in some ways. Man alive, sure. She's great. But highly recommend that. And what did I just read? Oh, I'm reading Martyr by Kaba Akbar, which is a novel. He's a poet, but this is his first novel, and it's that prose is poetic. I'll say it's really, really good. I've been loving that.
That's awesome. Well, we will link all those in the show notes, so if people want to find them, they can find them. Any final word for young adults in general?
Thank you. Y'all are in I'm still in that.
Yeah, right. You're still there. Too. You're still there.
Yeah, I keep fooling myself. I'm a year into, ever since college, I've been in 1 year contracts for literally every year since college. And this is the first time where I'm I know where I will be 12 months after starting this. But I'm still not 12 months in. I'm still in the first year. So I've fooled myself into thinking that I have stability, and I'm not there yet. But
you'll get there. You'll get there.
Yeah. For young adults, I think invest in community, make it if you have to, and be ready to invite people in to be transformed by it. Wow. The way that God is calling you into the world is what the world needs right now. And so if you have to go out and invent new communities in order to follow God, do it. But don't do it alone.
Amen, my friend. The book is Hungry for Hope. Go pre-order it. It's available in a couple weeks. You can get it, I'm guessing, any local bookstore that you go to, or you can get it online as well. Baird's chapter is on tokenism. Thank you so much for your time, Baird. We really appreciate you.
Thanks, Phil. It was great talking.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The Collective Voice, the premier podcast of the 787 Collective. For more information, visit us at 787collective.org or find us on social media. And if you enjoyed what you heard, be sure to subscribe, rate us, and share a review. For when you do, you are tricking the algorithm for the common good.